Three men in tailored suits thought they could steal a $1 billion empire over wine and signatures. They didn't notice the waitress. Big mistake. Tonight, you'll witness how one quiet woman and a grieving billionaire brought corporate vultures to their knees, not with violence, but with patience, precision, and a recording device hidden beneath an apron. This is a story about underestimation, revenge, and the power of silence. If you stay until the end, you'll see why the most dangerous people in any room are often the ones no one's watching. Drop a comment with your city name so I can see how far this story travels. Hit that like button. Let's begin. The Pinnacle Club didn't welcome just anyone through its brass-plated doors. Membership required 7 figures minimum, references from 3 existing members, and the kind of reputation that looked clean in newspaper profiles while hiding rot underneath. The building itself sat on Chicago's Gold Coast like a monument to old money. Marble columns, Persian rugs thick enough to muffle secrets, and private dining rooms where deals got made that would never see sunlight. Elena Reyes had worked there for 3 years, and she'd perfected the art of being nobody. She was good at it. Too good, maybe. At 30 years old, she'd learned that being invisible meant survival. Keep your head down, speak softly, never make eye contact unless absolutely necessary. Smile just enough to seem pleasant, but not enough to seem interesting. The uniform helped. A plain black dress, sensible shoes, hair pulled back tight enough to give her a headache by the end of every shift. Tonight, that headache started early. "More wine," one of the men grunted without looking up from his tablet. He was the loud one, Richard Mallory, with a neck that spilled over his collar and fingers thick as sausages. Elena had served him before. He never said please, never said thank you, just snapped his fingers like she was a dog. She refilled his glass. Her hand didn't shake. It never did, not anymore. The private dining room they'd reserved was called the Wellington Room, all dark wood paneling and oil paintings of men who'd been dead 100 years. 3 place settings. 3 leather portfolios. 3 men who thought they owned the world, or at least wanted to. Richard Mallory sat at the head of the table, occupying space like it was his right. To his left was James Cortland, early 50s, silver-haired, the kind of handsome that came with expensive dentistry and a personal trainer. He smiled too much. Elena didn't trust people who smiled that much, especially not when their eyes stayed cold. The third man, Douglas Way, barely spoke. He was younger than the others, maybe 40, with wire-rimmed glasses and the nervous energy of someone who was smart enough to know what they were doing was wrong, but greedy enough to do it anyway. He kept checking his phone, fingers drumming against the table. Elena moved around the room like smoke. There, but not there. Pouring water. Adjusting napkins. Bringing the appetizers they'd ordered but wouldn't eat because men like this never actually cared about food at business dinners. "So we're agreed," Mallory said, stabbing a piece of prosciutto with his fork. "The Cole situation is a gift. Adrian's distracted, emotional, vulnerable. His wife's been dead, 8 months? 7, Cortland corrected, swirling his wine. Cancer. Brutal way to go." Elena's stomach tightened, but she kept her face blank. She was adjusting the breadbasket. Just the waitress. Just part of the furniture. "Even better," Mallory continued. "Man's raising a kid alone now, probably barely sleeping. Board's already shaky on him. Young guy, inherited the company from daddy, never really earned it. This is the perfect time to strike." Way finally looked up from his phone. "You're sure the projections will hold up under scrutiny?" "They're beautiful," Cortland said, and that smile stretched wider. "We've got analysts who'll swear the company's hemorrhaging money. Pension funds already being quietly drained. Offshore accounts, shell companies, the usual. By the time anyone notices, we'll have already flipped our shares and walked away with $200 million each." $200 million. Elena carefully set down the water pitcher. Her movements were slow, deliberate. No one looked at her. "The proxy votes are the key," Mallory said. "We need the board to move against Adrian before he realizes what's happening." "Douglas, you said you had someone inside." Way nodded. "Sarah Chen, VP of Operations. She's ambitious, overlooked for promotion twice. I've been cultivating her for 6 months. She'll deliver 12 board votes, guaranteed." "And the documentation?" "Forged signatures on the pension transfers. Backdated contracts showing Adrian approved everything. We've got a paper trail that leads right to his desk." Way's voice was flat, mechanical, like he was describing a grocery list instead of a crime. Elena moved to the sidebar, began arranging dessert plates. The recording device pressed against her ribs, a small weight beneath her apron. It was no bigger than a pack of gum, but it felt like it was burning through her skin. She'd been terrified when Adrian Cole had approached her 2 weeks ago. It had been late, after a different private dinner. She'd been cleaning up, alone in one of the smaller rooms when he'd simply appeared in the doorway. Elena had nearly dropped the stack of plates she was carrying. "Elena Reyes," he'd said quietly. Not a question. She'd frozen. Wealthy people didn't know her name. They didn't see her long enough to learn it. Adrian Cole was 32 but looked older that night, tiredness carved into the lines around his eyes. He'd been wearing jeans and a simple gray sweater. No tie, no suit. His dark hair was slightly too long, like he'd forgotten to get it cut. There was something about him that seemed almost fragile, which was strange because everyone knew Adrian Cole had built his father's modest pharmaceutical company into a billion-dollar empire. "I need your help," he'd said. And then he'd told her everything, about the suspicious board movements, the unexplained financial discrepancies, the feeling that something was very wrong but no proof, nothing concrete. His lawyer said his hands were tied without evidence. "I can't investigate my own board without tipping them off," he'd explained, voice low and urgent. "But they're planning something. I can feel it. They think I'm weak right now, distracted. They're not entirely wrong." Elena had stood there, clutching dirty plates, not understanding why a billionaire was confiding in her. "You're invisible to them," Adrian had said, and something in his eyes made her chest ache. "You hear things, see things. They'd never suspect you." "I'm just a waitress." Exactly. He'd offered her money, a lot of money, enough to change her life. But that's not why she'd said yes. She'd said yes because of the way his voice cracked when he mentioned his daughter. Because she'd seen him once in the club's lobby, holding a little girl's hand, looking like he was barely holding himself together. Because Elena knew what it was like to be underestimated, dismissed, treated like you didn't matter. And maybe, just maybe, she was tired of being invisible. Now, standing in the Wellington room with 3 men casually discussing how to destroy someone's life, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, the cold kind, the dangerous kind. "What about Adrian's lawyers?" Cortland asked, finishing his wine. Elena stepped forward immediately to refill it. He didn't acknowledge her existence. "They're good, but they're slow," Mallory said. "Corporate attorneys. By the time they figure out what's happening, we'll have already called the emergency board meeting, voted Adrian out, and installed James as interim CEO. Then we liquidate the assets, sell off the profitable divisions, and tank the stock price. Won't that hurt us?" "We'll have already shorted the stock," Wei said. "We make money on the way down." Cortland laughed. "It's almost too easy." "The man's a mess," Mallory agreed. "I saw him last week at the Parker benefit. Looked like he hadn't slept in days, left early because his nanny called about the kid. Pathetic." Elena's hand tightened on the wine bottle. She wanted to smash it across his face, wanted to scream that Adrian Cole had lost his wife, that he was raising a 6-year-old daughter alone, that maybe he wasn't sleeping because he was trying to be both parents while running a company that employed 15,000 people. Instead, she smiled blandly and asked, "Will you be having dessert this evening?" Mallory waved her off. "Just bring the check." "Of course." She retreated to the sidebar, pulled out her order pad, wrote something meaningless. The recording device was still running. She'd gotten everything. As she walked toward the door, she heard Cortland say, "To the end of the Cole dynasty. May it fall quickly and profitably." The sound of 3 glasses clicking together made her skin crawl. Elena pushed through the swinging door into the service corridor, the sounds of the dining room fading behind her. Her heart was hammering now, adrenaline finally catching up. She'd done it. 7 weeks of careful watching, listening, positioning herself to serve their dinners, and finally they'd said enough to hang themselves. She reached into her apron with shaking hands and stopped the recording. The corridor was empty, dim. From the kitchen, she could hear the clatter of dishes, the sharp voice of Chef Marcus yelling at someone about plating. Normal sounds. A normal night. Except nothing about this was normal. Elena had grown up in a neighborhood where people didn't trust the police, where problems got handled quietly or not at all. Her mother had cleaned houses for rich families, came home exhausted every night smelling like other people's cleaning products. Elena had watched her mother become invisible too, had sworn she'd never end up the same way. And yet here she was. 30 years old, serving wine to men who wouldn't remember her face 10 minutes after she left the room. But tonight was different. Tonight, she mattered. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number, but she knew who it was. "Did you get it?" Elena typed back with trembling fingers. "Everything." They confessed to all of it. The response came immediately. "You're incredible. Meet me at the office. 1 hour. Please." She stared at the screen. The Palmer Industries building was downtown, a 40-minute train ride. She was supposed to work until midnight. "I'll be there," she typed. Elena took a breath, smoothed her apron, and walked back into the Wellington room. The men were standing now, shaking hands, gathering their portfolios. The deal was done. In their minds, Adrian Cole was already finished. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Elena said softly. "Your check." Mallory barely glanced at it before tossing down a credit card. "Keep the change." The tip was 12%. Of course it was. 10 minutes later, they were gone. Elena cleaned the table mechanically, stacking plates, folding napkins. The room felt different now, like it was holding its breath. She thought about Adrian Cole, about the first time she'd seen him nearly a year ago, when his wife was still alive. They'd come to the club for their anniversary dinner. Elena had been their server. She'd watched them across the table, the way they looked at each other like they were the only two people in the world. His wife had been beautiful, laughing, alive. 4 months later, Elena had served Adrian again. He'd been alone that time, just him and business associates. His wife was in treatment by then. Everyone knew, even though no one said anything. He'd looked hollow. The last time she'd seen them together was March. His wife could barely walk. They'd come anyway, insisted on their usual table. Elena had brought water with lemon without being asked because she'd remembered that's what his wife always ordered. The woman had smiled at her, really smiled, like Elena was a person. "Thank you," she'd whispered. 3 weeks later, she was dead. Elena finished clearing the table. She removed her apron, folded it carefully, and placed it on the service counter. Then she walked to the employee locker room, changed into jeans and a jacket, and clocked out. The night manager, Greg, looked up from his paperwork. "Leaving early?" "Family emergency," Elena lied smoothly. He waved her off, already distracted by something on his computer screen. Outside, Chicago's November wind cut through her jacket. Elena pulled it tighter and headed for the L train. The platform was nearly empty this time of night, just her and a couple of college kids drunk and laughing about something. She checked the recording on her phone, making sure it had transferred correctly. It had. 37 minutes of crystal clear audio. Mallory's voice. "The Cole situation is a gift." Cortland's laugh. Way's mechanical recitation of forged documents and offshore accounts. Evidence. The train arrived with a screech of metal on metal. Elena found a seat in the back, pressed her forehead against the cold window, and watched the city blur past. She thought about what came next. Adrian had warned her that once they moved forward with this, there would be lawyers, depositions, possibly federal investigators. Her life would get complicated. The men she'd recorded would know she'd betrayed them, though they'd probably never understand why a waitress would matter enough to plan this carefully. But Elena wasn't afraid. For the first time in 3 years, maybe longer, she felt like she was doing something that mattered, something real. The train rocked and swayed. Lights from apartment windows flickered past. Somewhere in this city, Richard Mallory and James Cortland and Douglas Way were probably celebrating, congratulating themselves on a plan they thought was foolproof. Somewhere else, Adrian Cole was probably putting his daughter to bed, reading her a story, trying to be strong. Elena closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the train was pulling into the Clark/Lake station. She got off, transferred to the Blue Line, and rode it all the way to Washington. The Palmer Industries building was impossible to miss. 47 stories of steel and glass, lit up like a beacon. The lobby was empty except for a security guard who looked bored until Elena approached the desk. "I'm here to see Adrian Cole," she said. The guard checked his computer. "Name?" "Elena Reyes." He nodded. 47th floor, elevators to your right." The elevator was all mirrors and polished chrome. Elena caught her reflection, a small woman with dark hair pulled back, wearing a cheap jacket and old jeans, no makeup because she'd washed it off after her shift. She looked tired. She looked ordinary. She looked like someone Richard Mallory would never notice. The elevator climbed. Her ears popped. The numbers ticked higher. When the doors opened on the 47th floor, Elena stepped into a reception area that was bigger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city. The furniture was modern, expensive, the kind of place where every detail had been chosen by someone who got paid six figures to choose details. Adrian was standing by the windows, his back to her. "Elena," he said, without turning around. His voice was rough, like he'd been yelling or crying, or maybe both. "Thank you for coming." She walked closer, her footsteps silent on the thick carpet. "I got it all. Everything they said." He turned then, and Elena's breath caught. Adrian Cole looked wrecked. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. The expensive sweater was wrinkled. "Can I hear it?" he asked quietly. Elena pulled out her phone, pulled up the recording, and pressed play. Mallory's voice filled the room. "The Cole situation is a gift. Adrian's distracted, emotional, vulnerable." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. The recording continued. 7 minutes of conspiracy laid out in excruciating detail. Forged documents, stolen pension funds, bribed board members. A plan to dismantle a company that had taken 3 generations to build. When it finished, the silence was deafening. "They think I'm weak," Adrian said finally. His voice was very calm, very controlled. "They think grief makes me stupid." "You're not stupid," Elena said. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No, but I am grieving. They're right about that much." He turned back to the window. She was everything. The person who balanced me out, made me better, made me human. And now she's gone, and I'm trying to raise our daughter alone and run this company, and some nights I can't breathe because it's too much. Elena didn't know what to say. She'd never been married, never had kids, never lost someone the way he'd lost his wife. "But they made a mistake," Adrian continued, his voice hardening. "They assumed that grief equals weakness, that loving someone, losing someone, makes you vulnerable." He turned to face her again, and something in his expression made Elena's pulse quicken. This wasn't the broken man from the Parker benefit. This was someone else. Someone focused, dangerous. "They forgot that the most dangerous people are the ones with nothing left to lose," he said softly. "And I have already lost everything that matters except my daughter and this company. I will burn them to the ground before I let them take either one." Elena believed him. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" Adrian smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. "Now we set the trap. They're planning to call an emergency board meeting Friday morning. Vote me out, install Cortland, start liquidating assets. They think I don't know. They think I'm too distracted to notice." He walked to his desk, picked up a folder, and handed it to Elena. Inside were photographs, financial documents, emails. "My private investigators have been busy," Adrian said. "While you were gathering audio evidence, they were tracing money. Offshore accounts in the Caymans, shell corporations, bribes to Sarah Chen that go back 8 months. We have everything." "Then why do you need the recording?" "Because the recording gives us intent. Conspiracy. It's one thing to find suspicious financial transactions. It's another thing to hear them planning it in their own words, laughing about it." His eyes met hers. "You gave us the weapon we needed." Elena looked down at the folder, at the evidence of corruption so deep it made her sick. "What about the pension fund?" she asked. "They said they were draining it. $18 million, missing over 6 months, routed through a dozen accounts, but it all leads back to them." Adrian's voice was ice. 15,000 employees, people who've worked for this company for decades. They were going to steal their retirements and walk away rich. The anger Elena had felt earlier came rushing back, hot and fierce. "Let me help," she heard herself say. "Whatever you need. I want to help." Adrian studied her for a long moment. "This is going to get ugly. Federal charges, probably. SEC investigation. When this breaks, it'll be national news. Your name will come out. Mallory and the others will know you betrayed them." "I don't care." "You should. These are powerful men, vindictive men. They're criminals," Elena shot back. "And I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of watching people like them hurt people like everyone else. Your employees, the ones who actually do the work while men like Mallory steal from them." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. "Okay," he said simply. "Then here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, my lawyers are filing motions to freeze all of their assets." We're also filing complaints with the SEC, the FBI, and the State Attorney General. Thursday night, I'm calling my own emergency board meeting, the real board, not Sarah Chen's corrupted version. And Friday morning, when Mallory thinks he's voting me out, he paused, and that dangerous smile returned. Friday morning, federal agents are going to walk into that boardroom and arrest all three of them. Elena felt a chill run down her spine, not from fear, from anticipation. I want you there, Adrian continued, in that boardroom. I want them to see your face when they realize what's happening. I want them to know that the waitress they ignored brought them down. Yes, Elena said without hesitation. They spent the next 2 hours going over details. Adrian's legal team would need her to sign affidavits, provide testimony. There would be questions about how she obtained the recording, whether she'd been coerced. Elena would have to be prepared. Are you sure about this? Adrian asked as they were wrapping up. It was almost 2 a.m. now. Once we start, there's no going back. Elena thought about her mother, dead at 55 from working herself to exhaustion. Thought about every time someone had looked through her instead of at her. Thought about Richard Mallory's thick fingers snapping for more wine. I'm sure, she said. Adrian nodded. Then we're going to win. He walked her to the elevator. As the doors were closing, he said, Elena, thank you for believing me, for taking the risk. I won't forget it. The elevator descended. Elena watched the numbers tick down, 47, 46, 45, and felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope. The lobby was still empty. The security guard nodded as she passed. Outside, the November wind had picked up, colder now. Elena pulled out her phone and called an Uber she probably couldn't afford. The ride home took 20 minutes. Her apartment was in Pilsen, a studio on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days. The lock stuck like it always did. Inside, everything was exactly how she'd left it, small, cramped, but clean. Her one window looked out onto a brick wall. Elena sat on her bed and finally let herself shake. What had she done? What had she agreed to? She just declared war on 3 men who could crush her without thinking. Men with lawyers and money and connections. Men who'd already proven they were willing to commit crimes for profit. But then she thought about Adrian's daughter, a little girl who'd already lost her mother and might lose everything else if Elena didn't hold her nerve. She thought about 15,000 employees who had no idea their pensions were being stolen. She thought about justice, a concept that had always seemed abstract until tonight. Elena lay back on her bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere across the city, Richard Mallory was probably sleeping peacefully in his mansion, dreaming of $200 million. Somewhere else, Douglas Way was probably awake, nervous energy keeping him scrolling through his phone. And somewhere, Adrian Cole was probably standing by his daughter's bed, watching her sleep, trying to find the strength to keep fighting. Elena closed her eyes. Friday was 3 days away. 3 days until the trap snapped shut. 3 days until the invisible waitress became the most important witness in a case that would make headlines. 3 days until Richard Mallory learned that sometimes the people you don't notice are the most dangerous ones in the room. Elena smiled in the darkness. Let them underestimate her one more time. It would be the last mistake they ever made. Elena didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed watching shadows move across her ceiling, listening to the building settle, replaying the recording in her head. At 5:30, she gave up and made coffee she couldn't afford to waste but couldn't stomach drinking. Her hands were still shaking. By Wednesday morning, Adrian's legal team had moved into action like a surgical strike. Elena found herself in a glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor of Palmer Industries, surrounded by lawyers who spoke in abbreviations she didn't understand. SEC, FBI. RICO. Discovery. Deposition. Miss Reyes, we need you to walk us through exactly how you obtained the recording, said Catherine Park, Adrian's lead attorney. She was maybe 45, sharp-featured, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Elena's car. Every detail matters. Elena told them everything. How Adrian had approached her. How she'd positioned herself to serve the Wellington Room dinners whenever Mallory's assistant made reservations. How she'd worn the recording device 7 times before they finally said enough to incriminate themselves. And you were never coerced? Catherine asked. No? Never promised anything in exchange for your cooperation? Elena hesitated. He offered me money. I said no. That made Catherine's eyebrows rise. You said no to how much? $50,000. The lawyers exchanged glances. One of them, a younger man named Marcus Chen, leaned forward. Why? Because I didn't want it to be about money, Elena said quietly. I wanted it to be about doing the right thing. Catherine made a note on her legal pad. That's good. The defense will try to paint you as a paid informant, someone with financial motive to fabricate evidence. Your refusal of compensation strengthens our position. I don't care about strengthening positions, Elena shot back. I care about stopping them. Catherine studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good. Hold on to that anger. You're going to need it. The deposition took 4 hours. Elena recounted the same story 6 different ways while a stenographer's fingers flew across her machine. Yes, she understood she was under oath. Yes, she obtained the recording legally under Illinois one-party consent laws. No, she hadn't been discovered. Yes, she was willing to testify in federal court. When they finally released her, Elena's head was pounding and her throat was dry. She stumbled out of the conference room to find Adrian waiting in the hallway. How are you holding up? He asked. I feel like I've been hit by a truck. That's the legal system for you. He handed her a bottle of water. My team can be intense, Catherine especially, but they're the best. Elena opened the water, drank half of it in one go. What happens now? Now we wait for the SEC to process our complaint. The FBI's already started their investigation based on your recording. Asset freezes should go into effect tomorrow morning. Adrian checked his watch. And in about 6 hours, Douglas Way is going to get a very unpleasant phone call from his bank. Will they run? Probably try to. We've already flagged their passports. If any of them attempt to leave the country, they'll be detained at the airport. Elena leaned against the wall. Through the windows, she could see Chicago stretching out below them, oblivious to the war being waged in corporate towers and law offices. Are you scared? Adrian asked quietly. She thought about it. Terrified. But also, I don't know. Alive, maybe? For the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. It does matter. More than you know. He paused. Elena, when this is over, when they're arrested and the company's secure, you'll need protection. Mallory has connections, people who might try to retaliate. I can take care of myself. I'm sure you can. But let me help anyway. Security detail, legal protection, relocation if you want it. You took a massive risk for me. For my daughter. I don't take that lightly. Elena met his eyes. Why did you choose me? Really? There are probably dozens of people who work at the club. Why trust a waitress you'd met maybe 3 times? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. You remember my wife's last visit to the club? Yes. You brought her water with lemon without being asked. She mentioned it to me on the way home, said you were the only person all night who treated her like a human being instead of someone to feel sorry for. His voice cracked slightly. She died 2 weeks later. I remembered that kindness, and when I needed someone I could trust, someone who saw people instead of just their bank accounts, I thought of you. Elena's throat tightened. She didn't trust herself to speak. Anyway, Adrian said, clearing his throat, you should go home, get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be chaotic. He was right. Thursday morning arrived like a bomb going off. Elena was making coffee when her phone started buzzing with news alerts. She'd set up notifications for anything mentioning Palmer Industries, and now her screen was flooding with headlines. SEC freezes assets in Palmer Industries investigation. Federal probe targets. Corporate executives in pension fraud scheme. Palmer Industries. Board members under investigation. She grabbed her laptop and pulled up the first article. A major financial news site had broken the story an hour ago. Sources within the SEC confirmed that 3 executives connected to Palmer Industries were under investigation for securities fraud, pension theft, and conspiracy. Assets totaling over $300 million had been frozen pending further inquiry. The article didn't name names yet, but it wouldn't take long. Elena's phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Miss Reyes, this is Agent Sarah Vance with the FBI. We need you to come in for questioning today. Can you be at our Chicago field office by 10? Elena looked at the clock. It was 7:15. Yes, she said. I'll be there. The FBI field office was downtown, a concrete fortress that looked exactly like what it was. Elena had never been inside a federal building before. Security was intense. Metal detectors, ID checks, an escort who led her through hallways that all looked the same. Agent Vance turned out to be a woman in her early 50s, with gray-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She sat across from Elena in a windowless interview room and got straight to business. We've authenticated the recording you provided. Voice analysis confirms it's Richard Mallory, James Cortland, and Douglas Way. The content matches financial evidence we've been gathering independently. So you already suspected them? We've had our eye on certain irregularities at Palmer Industries for about 4 months, but we couldn't prove intent until your recording. That changed everything. Vance leaned forward. I need you to understand something, Miss Reyes. These men are about to realize their world is ending. People in that situation sometimes do desperate things. Have you noticed anyone following you? Phone calls? Unusual activity? No. Good. Keep it that way. Vary your routine. Don't go anywhere alone if you can help it. And if you see anything suspicious, call me immediately. She slid a business card across the table. My personal cell is on the back. Elena pocketed the card. When will they be arrested? We're coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Indictments should be handed down by tomorrow morning. Then we move. Vance's expression hardened. These aren't just white-collar criminals, Miss Reyes. They stole $18 million from people who can't afford to lose it. Retirement funds, healthcare benefits. We're going to make sure they spend a very long time in federal prison. The interview lasted another hour. More questions, more details, more legal jargon Elena was starting to understand despite herself. When it was finally over, Agent Vance walked her to the elevator. You did good work, the agent said. Takes courage to stand up to powerful people. I just served them wine, Elena said. No, you did a lot more than that. Elena took the train back to Pilsen, hyper-aware of everyone around her. Was that man in the business suit watching her? What about the woman with the sunglasses? She was being paranoid, probably, but Vance's warning had rattled her. Back in her apartment, Elena tried to distract herself with mindless television, but couldn't focus. Every 5 minutes, she checked her phone for updates. The news cycle had exploded now. Palmer Industries' stock had dropped 12%. Analysts were speculating about instability. Anonymous sources were leaking details. At 3:30, her phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. Board meeting moved up to tonight, 7 p.m. Can you be there? Yes. Where? Palmer Building, 47th floor. Come to the executive entrance. Security will be expecting you. Elena stared at the message. Tonight. The emergency board meeting was supposed to be tomorrow morning, but Adrian was forcing it to happen tonight instead, changing the timeline, keeping them off balance. She texted back, I'll be there. Then she opened her closet and stared at her limited options. Everything she owned was either waitress uniforms or cheap casual clothes. Nothing appropriate for a corporate boardroom. Nothing that said, I belong here. Elena almost laughed at the absurdity. She was about to walk into a room full of millionaires and billionaires wearing Target clearance rack. She chose black pants and a gray sweater. Professional enough. It would have to do. The executive entrance to Palmer Industries was around the back, unmarked except for a keycard reader. Elena stood there feeling stupid until a security guard opened the door from inside. Miss Reyes? Yes. This way. He led her through corridors she'd never seen before, past offices that were dark and empty at this hour. They took a private elevator that required the guard's keycard to operate. When the doors opened on the 47th floor, Adrian was waiting. He looked different tonight, composed. The exhaustion was still there in the lines around his eyes, but he wore it differently now, like armor. He was in a dark suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, all business. Thank you for coming, he said. What changed? Why tonight instead of tomorrow? Douglas Way tried to withdraw $2 million from an offshore account this morning. The freeze stopped it, but he knows something's wrong. I can't risk them figuring out the full extent of our evidence and running, so we're accelerating. He led her down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than Elena would make in a lifetime. At the end was a set of double doors. The boardroom, Adrian said. 12 members total. 8 of them are loyal. 3 are compromised by Sarah Chen, and Sarah herself makes 4 votes against me. That's not enough to remove you, is it? No, they'd need 7 votes. But they don't know I know about Sarah. They think they have more support than they do. Adrian paused with his hand on the door. When we go in there, you're my guest. You don't need to say anything unless I ask you to. Just watch, listen. And when the time comes, he trailed off, but Elena understood. When the time comes, be ready. Adrian opened the doors. The Palmer Industries boardroom was enormous, dominated by a mahogany table that could seat 20. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Chicago's skyline. The city lit up against the darkening sky. 12 people were already seated, some chatting quietly, others on their phones or laptops. Elena recognized Sarah Chen immediately. Mid-40s, Asian American, wearing an expensive navy suit and an expression that tried to project confidence but couldn't quite hide the nervousness underneath. She looked up when Adrian entered, and something flickered across her face. Surprise? Concern? The other board members ranged from their 50s to one ancient-looking man who had to be pushing 80. Old money, all of them. The kind of people Elena had served 1,000 times at the Pinnacle Club. Adrian took his seat at the head of the table. Elena stood by the wall, trying to make herself small and invisible again. It came naturally. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Adrian began. His voice was calm, controlled. "I know the news today has raised questions. I want to address those questions directly." "Adrian," Sarah Chen interrupted smoothly, "perhaps we should discuss this in executive session. Your guest..." She looked at Elena with barely concealed disdain. "Elena stays," Adrian said flatly. "She's here at my request. This is highly irregular. So is attempting to stage a corporate coup, but we'll get to that." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Sarah's smile froze on her face. An older man, white-haired and distinguished, cleared his throat. "Adrian, what exactly is going on? The SEC investigation, the asset freezes, we're getting calls from investors demanding answers we don't have." "Then let me provide those answers, George." Adrian opened a folder in front of him. "For the past 6 months, 3 individuals with connections to this company have been systematically looting our pension fund and preparing to tank our stock price for personal profit. They forged documents, bribed board members, and conspired to remove me as CEO so they could liquidate the company's assets." Dead silence. Sarah Chen found her voice first. That's absurd. "Adrian, I know you've been under tremendous stress, but these accusations are backed by evidence." Adrian's voice cut through her protest like a knife. "Audio recordings, financial records, emails, we have everything." "We?" Sarah's composure was cracking. "Who is we?" "Myself, my legal team, the FBI, and Elena." Every head in the room turned to look at her. Elena forced herself to meet their eyes, to stand straight, to not shrink back into invisibility. "Your waitress?" Sarah's laugh was high-pitched, disbelieving. "You're basing a federal investigation on the word of a waitress?" "I'm basing it on her recording of Richard Mallory, James Cortland, and Douglas Way discussing their conspiracy in detail," Adrian said coldly. "Elena was serving them last Tuesday at the Pinnacle Club when they laid out their entire plan. She recorded it all." The old man, George, leaned back in his chair. "My God." "Sarah, you were specifically named as a co-conspirator," Adrian continued, his eyes locked on her. "Douglas Way told the others you'd deliver 12 board votes in exchange for a $250,000 payment and a promotion once Cortland took over as CEO. Sarah's face had gone white. "You have no proof of that." "Actually, we do. The payment hit your offshore account in the Caymans 3 days ago. Want me to read the transaction number?" For a moment, Elena thought Sarah might faint. The woman gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "I want my lawyer," Sarah stammered. "You're gonna need one," Adrian agreed. "FBI will be here in approximately 15 minutes to take you into custody." "You son of a—" "Watch your language, Sarah. There's a lady present." Adrian nodded toward Elena. Sarah turned on her like a snake. "You stupid little bitch. Do you have any idea what you've done? These are powerful people. They will destroy you. They're going to prison," Elena said quietly. Her voice didn't shake. "And you're going with them." Sarah lunged out of her chair, but George grabbed her arm. "Sit down," he said firmly. "For once in your life, shut up and sit down." She sat, but her eyes burned with hatred as she stared at Elena. The next 10 minutes were chaos. Board members demanded to see evidence. Adrian's assistant distributed copies of financial records, email transcripts, excerpts from the recording. Elena watched them read, watched their expressions shift from disbelief to shock to fury. 18 million, one of them whispered. They stole 18 million from our employees. Not just employees, another added. Tom Brenner from accounting just retired last month. His whole pension was in that fund. My sister-in-law works in logistics. She's been here 23 years. The personal connections were hitting them now. These weren't abstract numbers. These were people they knew. George looked at Adrian with something like respect. How long have you known? I suspected for about 2 months. Couldn't prove it until Elena brought me the recording last week. And the SEC, FBI, filed complaints on Tuesday. Asset freezes went into effect this morning. Federal indictments should be finalized by tomorrow. George nodded slowly. You could have told us. I couldn't risk it. Not until I knew who was compromised. Adrian's gaze swept the table. I trust 8 of you completely. The other 4... He looked at Sarah and 3 others who had gone very quiet. Well, we'll see how this plays out. One of the other suspected board members, a nervous-looking man in his 60s, raised his hand like he was in grade school. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what Sarah was planning. She approached me about voting against you, but I said no. I can provide emails proving— Save it for the investigators, Adrian interrupted. I'm not a judge. That's what courts are for. The elevator chimed in the hallway outside. Footsteps approached. Agent Vance appeared in the doorway with 4 other agents, all wearing FBI jackets. Sarah Chen? Vance said. Sarah didn't move. She seemed paralyzed, staring at the agents like they couldn't possibly be real. Sarah Chen, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit securities fraud, theft of pension funds, and bribery. You have the right to remain silent. Vance continued reading Miranda rights while another agent cuffed Sarah's wrists. The board members watched in stunned silence as she was led out. At the doorway, Sarah turned back one last time. You'll regret this, she hissed at Elena. All of you will regret this. Then she was gone. Agent Vance remained behind. Mr. Cole, we'll need statements from everyone present. And Miss Reyes, thank you for your cooperation. Your recording was the break we needed. Where are Mallory and the others? Adrian asked. Being arrested as we speak. Cortland's at his Lake Forest estate. Way's at O'Hare trying to board a flight to Singapore. Mallory's lawyer is already negotiating surrender terms, but we're not interested in deals. Elena felt something release in her chest. It was done. They'd actually done it. The FBI took statements for another hour. Board members were escorted out one by one, shell-shocked and shaken. By 9 o'clock, only Elena, Adrian, and George remained. Quite a night, George said wearily. He looked at Elena. Young lady, I don't know whether to thank you or apologize to you. You walked into a war zone. I walked into it willingly, Elena replied. Still, takes guts. He turned to Adrian. You did right by your father's company, by Sarah's memory. I'm proud of you. Adrian's composure cracked just slightly. Thank you, George. When the old man left, Adrian sank into his chair and put his head in his hands. For a long moment, he didn't move. Adrian? Elena asked quietly. I'm okay. Just give me a second. She waited. Outside, the city glittered. Somewhere down there, Richard Mallory was probably in handcuffs. James Cortland was probably calling his lawyer. Douglas Way was probably sitting in an airport holding cell, realizing his life was over. Adrian finally looked up. His eyes were wet. I wish Sarah could have seen this, he said hoarsely. My wife, I mean, not Chen. She always believed in doing the right thing, no matter the cost. This is exactly the kind of fight she would have wanted me to take. Elena didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Sometimes silence was enough. Come on, Adrian said, standing. Let me take you home. You've earned about a year's worth of sleep. They rode the elevator down in silence. Adrian's driver was waiting outside, a black SUV with tinted windows. Elena had never been in a car that nice. The leather seats were heated. There was bottled water in cup holders. Where to? The driver asked. Elena gave her address in Pilsen. The driver didn't react, but she saw Adrian glance at her. You live alone? He asked. Yes. I'm assigning you a security detail starting tomorrow, just for a few weeks until things settle. That's not necessary. Humor me. They drove through downtown, then south toward her neighborhood. The buildings got shorter, grittier. The SUV looked absurdly out of place on her street. When they pulled up to her building, Adrian got out with her. You don't have to walk me up, Elena protested. I know. He did anyway. 3 flights of stairs, peeling paint on the walls, the smell of someone's cooking lingering in the hallway. Elena unlocked her door, feeling embarrassed by the size of her apartment, by how small and shabby it was compared to where he lived. But Adrian didn't seem to notice. He just made sure the locks worked and checked the window. Boring. Tomorrow's going to be crazy, he said. Media will probably identify you as a witness. Your phone's going to ring off the hook. Don't talk to anyone except the FBI and my legal team. Understand? Okay. I mean it, Elena. Reporters will try every trick to get you to comment. Don't fall for it. I won't. He nodded, then hesitated at the door. Thank you. For everything. I know I keep saying that, but I mean it. You saved my company, my daughter's future. You saved people's livelihoods. You would have found another way, Elena said. Maybe, but you made it possible. He met her eyes. When this is over, we're going to talk about your future. You're not going back to serving wine to people like Mallory. Before she could respond, he was gone. Elena locked the door behind him, engaged the deadbolt, and leaned against it. Her apartment felt different now. Smaller, maybe. Or maybe she felt bigger. She checked her phone. 17 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. 23 text messages. News alerts were still flooding in. Palmer Industries execs arrested in massive fraud case. FBI charges 3 with pension theft. Securities. Fraud. Corporate conspiracy unravels. Sources say insider tipped off investigators. Elena silenced her phone and dropped it on the counter. Tomorrow, the media would find her. Tomorrow, her life would change in ways she couldn't predict. Tomorrow, she'd have to face whatever came next. But tonight, she'd won. She made tea she didn't drink and sat by her window, watching lights in other apartments flicker on and off. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that somewhere across the city, 3 men were sitting in jail cells, their empires crumbling. Elena thought about Richard Mallory's thick fingers snapping for wine. Thought about his voice on the recording. Pathetic. He'd been talking about Adrian, about a man grieving his wife while trying to be a good father. Who is pathetic now? She smiled in the darkness. Somewhere, a phone was ringing. Somewhere, lawyers were scrambling. Somewhere, federal prosecutors were building cases that would put powerful men in prison for decades. And it had all started with a quiet waitress who nobody noticed. Elena finished her tea and went to bed. This time, she slept. Elena woke to someone pounding on her door at 6:15 Friday morning. For a confused moment, she thought it was still part of a dream, the recording playing on loop, Richard Mallory's voice echoing through empty rooms. Then the pounding came again, harder this time, and she jerked fully awake. Miss Reyes, Channel 7 News, we'd like to ask you a few questions. Her stomach dropped. They'd found her already. Elena stayed in bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin like it could protect her. More voices joined the first. Questions shouted through her door, overlapping each other until they were just noise. How long were you working with Adrian Cole? Did you know you were recording a federal crime? What made you decide to come forward? Her phone was buzzing on the nightstand. Elena grabbed it and saw 43 missed calls. Text messages flooding in faster than she could read them. Most were from numbers she didn't recognize, but one made her pause. Adrian. Don't open your door. Security detail is on the way. Sit tight. That message was from 5 minutes ago. Elena pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt, then went to her window. Down on the street, she could see news vans. 3 of them, maybe 4. Cameras pointed at her building, a small crowd gathering to watch. This was insane. Another text came through. Security is in the building. Guy named Marcus, tall, bald, looks like he could bench press a car. Let him in. 30 seconds later, a knock. Different from the reporter's frantic pounding. Firm, controlled, professional. Miss Reyes, I'm Marcus Townsend with Sentinel Security. Mr. Cole sent me. Elena looked through the peephole. The man was exactly as advertised. Tall, bald, built like he'd spent his entire life in a gym. He held up an ID badge. She opened the door a crack, chain still engaged. "I need you to pack a bag," Marcus said calmly. "Enough for a few days. We're getting you out of here." "Where?" "Somewhere the media can't find you. Mr. Cole has a property in Lake Geneva. Quiet, secure, off the grid." Elena looked past him at the reporters still camped by her door at the end of the hallway. One of them spotted Marcus and started shouting questions. "How long do I have?" she asked. 5 minutes. Just essentials. Let's move." Elena threw clothes into a duffel bag without really thinking about what she was grabbing. Toothbrush, phone charger, the few pieces of jewelry her mother had left her. Her hands were shaking again. This didn't feel real. 24 hours ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was being evacuated from her own apartment. Marcus waited by the door, his bulk blocking the reporter's view. When Elena was ready, he took her bag and positioned himself between her and the cameras. "Keep your head down," he said. "Don't answer any questions. Don't look at them. Just walk." They stepped into the hallway, and the noise hit like a physical force. Cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, voices overlapping in a chaotic mess. "Elena, how does it feel to take down billionaires?" "Did they threaten you?" "Are you in a relationship with Adrian Cole?" That last question made her stumble, but Marcus kept her moving. His hand on her elbow was firm, but not rough, guiding her through the scrum. They made it to the stairwell, and the door slammed shut behind them, muffling the shouting. "You okay?" Marcus asked. "Yeah, just wasn't expecting that. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Federal case like this, you're the star witness. Everyone wants your story." They went down the back stairs and out through a service exit Elena hadn't even known existed. A black SUV was waiting in the alley, engine running. Marcus opened the back door and Elena climbed in. The driver pulled out immediately, navigating through narrow streets until they hit the expressway heading north. Elena watched her building disappear in the side mirror, reporters still clustered out front like vultures. "How did they find me so fast?" she asked. "Court documents are public record," Marcus said from the front passenger seat. "Your name came up in the FBI's initial filings. After that, it's just basic research. Address, employment history, social media, though you don't seem to have much of that. Never saw the point." "Lucky for you, makes our job easier." The drive to Lake Geneva took 90 minutes. Elena dozed off somewhere past the Wisconsin border and woke when the SUV turned onto a gravel driveway cutting through dense woods. The property appeared gradually, a modern house built into the hillside, all glass and steel and sharp angles. A lake sparkled beyond it, morning sun turning the water silver. "This is Adrian's?" Elena asked. "One of his properties. He doesn't use it much anymore. Too many memories." Marcus's voice was careful, neutral. Elena understood. This was probably where Adrian had brought his wife. Family vacations, quiet weekends, back when life was normal. Inside, the house was immaculate and empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the lake. The furniture was expensive but not ostentatious. Family photos lined one wall. Adrian and Sarah and their daughter at various ages. Halloween costumes, birthday parties. A beach somewhere with impossibly blue water. Elena looked away. It felt like intruding on something private. "Make yourself at home," Marcus said. "Kitchen's stocked. Internet works if you need it, but I'd avoid social media for now. Mr. Cole will be up this evening after the arraignment." "Arraignment?" "Mallory, Cortland, and Way. Federal Courthouse, 9 a.m. Mr. Cole's planning to attend." Marcus showed her to a guest room with its own bathroom and more space than her entire apartment. Then he disappeared somewhere else in the house, giving her privacy. Elena sat on the bed and pulled out her phone. Against Marcus's advice, she opened Twitter and immediately regretted it. Her name was trending. Number 3 in the United States, right below some celebrity scandal and a political controversy. Thousands of tweets, most from people she'd never met, debating her choices and her character. Elena Reyes is a hero. Took down corporate criminals who were stealing from working people. Why should we trust a waitress who secretly recorded people? Seems shady to me. This is why you don't ignore the help. They're always watching. Adrian Cole clearly groomed this woman. She's half his age. Predator behavior. That last one made Elena's face burn. She wasn't half his age. She was 30, he was 32. And nothing had happened between them. Nothing. She closed Twitter and opened the news instead. Coverage was wall to wall. CNN had a legal analyst explaining the charges. Fox Business was speculating about market impact. Local Chicago stations were interviewing people who worked at Palmer Industries, getting reactions. "I can't believe it," one woman said, tears streaming down her face. "I've been here 19 years. My whole retirement was in that pension fund. If they'd gotten away with it." Elena's throat tightened. That's why she'd done this. For people like that woman, people who played by the rules and expected the same from others. Her phone rang. Catherine Park, Adrian's attorney. "Miss Reyes, I need to prep you for what's coming. The arraignment's this morning, but the trial won't start for months, maybe longer. During that time, the defense is going to come after you hard." "What do you mean?" "They'll investigate every aspect of your life. Financial records, employment history, relationships, social media posts from 10 years ago. Looking for anything they can use to discredit you. Any skeletons in your closet I should know about?" Elena thought about it. "No, I've had speeding tickets. Broke up with a boyfriend badly a couple years ago. Nothing criminal." "Good. Keep it that way. No drugs, no excessive drinking, no questionable social media posts. You're under a microscope now." "This is insane. I just recorded what they said." "I know, but this is how it works. They can't attack the evidence, so they'll attack you." Catherine paused. "Can you handle this?" "Honestly. Because if you can't, we need to know now." Elena looked out the window at the lake, the trees, the expensive house that belonged to a man who'd lost everything that mattered and was still fighting. "I can handle it," she said. "Good. Stay where you are. Don't talk to anyone except me, Adrian, or the FBI. We'll be in touch." The call ended. Elena sat in silence, processing everything. Her life had imploded in less than 48 hours. She couldn't go home. Couldn't go to work. Her name was being debated by millions of strangers. And somewhere in Chicago, 3 men who'd never given her a second thought were sitting in a federal courthouse, knowing she'd destroyed them. Hours passed slowly. Elena explored the house, careful not to touch anything that looked too personal. She made coffee in a kitchen that had appliances she didn't know how to use. She stood by the windows and watched the lake, trying to imagine what it would be like to own a place like this. To have enough money that a house this beautiful could just sit empty most of the year. Around 2 in the afternoon, Marcus brought her a sandwich and bottled water. "Arraignment's done," he said. All 3 pled not guilty. Bail was denied. "They're staying in jail?" "Flight risk. Wei already tried to leave the country. Judge wasn't taking chances." "Good." Marcus studied her for a moment. "You doing okay? This is a lot to process." "I'm fine." "You don't have to be fine. This is the kind of thing that breaks people. No shame in admitting it's hard." Elena met his eyes. "Did Adrian tell you about his wife?" "He didn't have to. I worked security for them sometimes. Mrs. Cole was a good person, treated everyone with respect, didn't matter if you were the CEO or the guy parking cars. When she got sick," Marcus shook his head. "Mr. Cole fell apart, held it together in public, but I saw him after hours. Man was destroyed." "How did he come back from it?" "The kid, his daughter. She gave him a reason to keep going." Marcus paused. "And then this happened. The conspiracy. I think part of him was almost grateful for it, gave him something to focus on besides grief." "That's terrible." "Maybe, but people cope how they cope. You'll figure out your own way." Marcus left her alone after that. Elena tried to sleep but couldn't, so she ended up on the couch watching mindless television until headlights swept across the windows around 7. Adrian walked in looking like he'd aged 10 years since yesterday. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes. But when he saw Elena, some of the exhaustion lifted. "You're safe," he said. "Your security guy's very thorough. Marcus is the best." Adrian dropped his briefcase by the door and sank into a chair. The arraignment was intense. Mallory's lawyer tried to argue for bail, said his client was a respected businessman, not a flight risk. Judge laughed at him. "They're staying in custody?" "Minimum security federal detention until trial, which is more than they deserve, but it's something." Adrian rubbed his face. Cortland looked like he might throw up. Wei just stared straight ahead the whole time, wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. "And Mallory?" "Angry. kept glaring at the prosecutors like this was all some misunderstanding, like he couldn't comprehend that actions have consequences. Elena thought about Mallory's thick fingers snapping for wine, his dismissive voice, the way he talked about Adrian like he was nothing. "I hope he stays angry," she said quietly. Adrian looked at her with something like surprise. "You know what? Me too." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sun was setting over the lake, painting everything gold and orange. It was beautiful in a way that made Elena's chest ache. She'd lived in Chicago her whole life and never seen anything like this. "I need to apologize," Adrian said finally. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. For turning your life upside down. You can't even go home because there are reporters camped outside your building." "I made my choice," Elena said. "Nobody forced me." "Still, you didn't sign up for death threats on social media and lawyers digging through your past." "Death threats?" Adrian's expression darkened. "Catherine said you were trending on Twitter. I looked. Some of the comments..." He stopped. "I've got people handling it, reporting the worst ones, coordinating with law enforcement. But yeah, there are people out there who think you're the villain in this story." Elena had known that on some level, but hearing it confirmed made it more real. Somewhere out there, strangers hated her, wanted her hurt, all because she'd told the truth. "I don't regret it," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "What they did was wrong. Someone had to stop them." "You sound like Sarah, my wife, not Chen." Adrian smiled faintly. "She always said that evil wins when good people do nothing. Drove me crazy sometimes, how idealistic she was. But she was right." "What was she like?" The question came out before Elena could stop it. "I'm sorry, you don't have to..." "No, it's okay. I don't mind." Adrian leaned back, eyes distant. "She was bright. That's the word that fits best. Bright like sunshine. She'd walk into a room and people would just gravitate toward her. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she made you feel like you mattered, like whatever you had to say was the most important thing in the world." His voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat. "She was a teacher before we got married, 3rd grade. Kids loved her. She could make long division seem fun, which I still think is impossible, but she managed it." Adrian smiled at the memory. When she got pregnant with Lily, she planned to keep teaching. But the company was growing fast and I needed help, and Sarah had this business degree she'd never used, so she came on as VP of Community Relations, created our entire charitable foundation from scratch. She sounds incredible. She was. And then cancer just took her. 18 months from diagnosis to death. By the end, she weighed 90 pounds. Couldn't keep food down. The pain was so bad she'd cry in her sleep. Adrian's hands were clenched into fists. "I watched the strongest person I've ever known get reduced to nothing, and I couldn't do anything about it." Elena didn't know what to say. "What could you say to something like that?" "Lily was 5 when Sarah died," Adrian continued quietly. "Old enough to understand her mother was gone, but not old enough to understand why. She kept asking when Mommy was coming home. I had to tell her over and over that Mommy wasn't coming back. Do you know how hard that is, watching your kid's heart break and knowing you can't fix it?" "I can't imagine," Elena whispered. "That's why what Mallory and the others did makes me so angry. It's not just about the money or the company. It's that they saw my grief as weakness, as an opportunity. They looked at a man trying to hold his family together after losing his wife and thought, perfect target." Adrian's voice was cold now, hard. "They forgot that grief doesn't make you weak. It makes you willing to burn everything down before you lose anything else." The intensity in his eyes made Elena shiver. This was the side of Adrian Cole that had outmaneuvered 3 ruthless executives. The side that had set a trap and watched it close with surgical precision. "Tomorrow's going to be harder," he said, shifting gears. "The media is going to keep digging. Your ex-boyfriends might sell stories. People from your past might come forward claiming they know you. It's going to get ugly. I don't have any ex-boyfriends worth talking to, and my past is pretty boring." "Boring is good. Boring we can work with." Adrian stood up, walked to the windows. "I've been thinking about what comes next, for you, I mean, after all this is over. I'll go back to work, I guess." "At the Pinnacle Club? Serving wine to people like Mallory?" Elena hadn't thought about it. Going back to that life seemed impossible now. How could she smile blandly at wealthy men after everything that had happened? I don't know what else I'd do, she admitted. You're smart, observant, brave. You could do anything. Adrian turned to face her. I want to offer you a job at Palmer Industries. Elena stared at him. Doing what? I'm creating a new position, corporate ethics liaison. Someone who reports directly to me, keeps an eye on the board, flags anything that seems off. Someone I can trust. I don't have a college degree. I don't know anything about business. You knew enough to take down a conspiracy that my entire legal team missed. That counts for something. Adrian crossed his arms. Look, you don't have to decide now. Think about it. But Elena, you deserve better than being invisible. Better than serving people who don't even see you as human. She wanted to say yes immediately. Wanted to take the job and the salary that would change her life. But something held her back. Is this charity? She asked. Are you offering because you feel guilty? I'm offering because you earned it. Because you proved you have skills that most people spend their whole careers developing. And yes, because I owe you. Is that so bad? Elena thought about her apartment in Pilsen, about the Pinnacle Club and the men who snapped their fingers for wine, about her mother, dead at 55 from exhaustion. Can I really think about it? She asked. Take all the time you need. Marcus appeared in the doorway. Sir, I've got a call from Catherine. Something about Sarah Chen. Adrian's expression hardened. What about her? She's trying to make a deal. They moved to Adrian's study, a wood-paneled room with leather furniture and bookshelves filled with volumes that actually looked read. Marcus put the call on speaker. Catherine's voice came through crisp and professional. Chen's attorney just contacted the U.S. attorney. She wants to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. Absolutely not, Adrian said immediately. Adrian, you should hear her out. She claims to have information about other board members. Says the conspiracy went deeper than just Mallory's group. Of course it did. And she was part of it from the beginning. Yes, but she could give us leverage against the others. Names, dates, evidence we don't have. The U.S. attorney is interested. Adrian's jaw clenched. Elena could see him struggling with it, weighing justice against strategy. What kind of deal are they offering? He asked finally. Probation instead of prison time. She'd have to resign from all corporate positions, pay full restitution, cooperate completely with ongoing investigations. She stole from our employees, she conspired to destroy the company, and she walks away with probation? She walks away as a convicted felon who will never work in corporate America again, and in exchange, we potentially get evidence to bring down more conspirators. It's not ideal, but it's practical. Adrian looked at Elena. What do you think? The question surprised her. Why are you asking me? Because you're the one who risked everything for this. Your opinion matters. Elena thought about Sarah Chen's face when the FBI had walked into that boardroom. The hatred in her eyes when she'd called Elena a stupid little bitch. The way she'd been willing to betray 15,000 employees for money and power. I think she should pay for what she did, Elena said slowly. But if letting her deal means stopping other people like her, maybe it's worth it. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. No, but you have good instincts. Adrian turned back to the phone. Tell the U.S. attorney I'm not thrilled, but if Chen delivers real evidence, names, documents, recorded conversations, I won't fight the deal. But the second she holds anything back, all bets are off. Understood. I'll relay that. The call ended. Adrian slumped back in his chair, looking exhausted again. This is never really over, is it? Elena asked. No. Trials could take years. Appeals after that. Civil suits from employees whose pensions were stolen. Shareholder lawsuits, regulatory investigations. He laughed bitterly. Welcome to corporate America. How do you deal with it? I focus on what matters. My daughter. The company. Making sure the 15,000 people who depend on Palmer Industries still have jobs next year. Adrian met her eyes. And I remember that sometimes the right thing is also the hard thing. Sarah would have wanted me to fight. So I fight. They talked for another hour, going over logistics. Catherine would be filing additional motions Monday. The FBI wanted another interview with Elena next week. Media requests were piling up. 60 Minutes, CNN, Bloomberg, all wanting exclusive interviews. Don't do any of them, Adrian advised. Not until after the trial. Anything you say can be used against you on cross-examination. I wasn't planning to. I don't want to be famous. Too late for that, I'm afraid. You're already famous. The question is what you do with it. Later, after Adrian had gone to bed and Marcus was doing security checks, Elena stood by the windows and watched the moon reflect off the lake. Her phone buzzed with another news alert. More speculation about her background, her motives, her relationship with Adrian. Let them speculate, she thought. Let them dig. She had nothing to hide. Somewhere in a federal detention facility, Richard Mallory was probably lying on a thin mattress, staring at concrete walls, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. Did he remember the waitress? The quiet woman who'd refilled his wine and disappeared into the background? Probably not. Men like Mallory never remembered people like her. But he'd remember now. They all would. Elena pulled out her phone and opened the recording one more time. Mallory's voice. The Coles situation is a gift. No, she thought. I was the gift. The one you never saw coming. She deleted the recording from her phone. The FBI had copies. Catherine had copies. It would be played in court, dissected by lawyers, analyzed by experts. Elena didn't need to carry it anymore. Outside, an owl called from somewhere in the dark trees. The lake was perfectly still, reflecting stars. In a few hours, the sun would rise and the next phase would begin. More interviews, more depositions, more strangers picking apart her life looking for weakness. But tonight, Elena was safe. Tonight, 3 criminals were behind bars. Tonight, justice was working the way it was supposed to. She thought about Adrian's job offer. Corporate ethics liaison. A real salary, real benefits, real respect. Everything she'd never had before. Could she do it? Could she walk into Palmer Industries every day and be someone who mattered instead of someone invisible? The old Elena would have said no, would have convinced herself she wasn't qualified, wasn't smart enough, wasn't worthy. But the old Elena had never taken down billionaires. The old Elena had never looked Richard Mallory in the eye and told him he was going to prison. Maybe it was time to stop being the old Elena. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. Same face, same body, same person. But something was different now. Something had shifted during that recording. Or maybe during the boardroom confrontation. Or maybe right now in this moment. Elena Reyes wasn't invisible anymore. And she was never going to be invisible again. The preliminary hearing was set for Monday morning at the Dirksen Federal Building in downtown Chicago. Elena woke at 5, couldn't fall back asleep, and spent an hour trying on different outfits before settling on the same black pants and gray sweater she'd worn to the emergency board meeting. Catherine had told her to look professional but not expensive, relatable but not poor. Elena had no idea how to thread that needle, so she just wore what she had. Marcus drove her back to the city at 7. The SUV cut through early morning traffic while Elena watched Chicago wake up around them. People heading to work, grabbing coffee, living normal lives. She envied them. You ready for this? Marcus asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Does it matter? Not really. You're doing it either way. The federal building was a fortress of concrete and glass surrounded by security barriers. News vans were already setting up on the plaza. Elena spotted at least 6 cameras, reporters doing sound checks, a crowd gathering behind police barricades. Back entrance, Marcus said, pulling around to a loading dock. Catherine arranged it. They went through a service corridor and up a freight elevator that smelled like industrial cleaner. Catherine was waiting on the 7th floor, immaculate in a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back severely. Good, you're early, she said by way of greeting. We need to prep. She led Elena to a small conference room where 2 other attorneys were already set up with laptops and stacks of documents. They went through everything again. What Elena would be asked, how to answer, what to avoid saying. Don't volunteer information. Don't speculate. Don't let the defense attorneys rattle you. Mallory's lawyer is going to try to make you look like a stalker, Catherine warned. Like you targeted these men specifically, recorded them illegally, fabricated evidence to get close to Adrian. That's insane. Doesn't matter. He'll float the theory, see if it sticks. You need to stay calm, stick to facts, don't get emotional. What if I do get emotional? Catherine's expression softened slightly. Then you get emotional. You're human. The jury will understand that. Just don't lose your temper or say anything you'll regret. At 8:30, they moved to the courtroom. Elena had never been inside a federal courtroom before. It was bigger than she'd expected, all dark wood and brass fixtures and an American flag hanging behind the judge's bench. The gallery was packed. Reporters, Palmer Industries employees, curious onlookers who'd lined up for seats. Adrian was already there, sitting in the front row with several other people Elena didn't recognize. He caught her eye and nodded once. No smile, but something in his expression said, "You've got this." Then they brought in the defendants. Richard Mallory looked like he'd aged 20 years in a week. His expensive suit hung loose on him like he'd lost weight. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. He kept his eyes down as the marshals led him to the defense table. James Cortland came next, still handsome but hollow-eyed. His hands were cuffed in front of him. Elena noticed they were shaking. Douglas Way was last. He looked the worst of the three, pale, drawn, like he hadn't slept since his arrest. When he sat down, he immediately hunched forward, staring at the table. Sarah Chen wasn't there. Her deal had gone through over the weekend. Probation in exchange for testimony. Elena tried not to think about whether that was fair. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Patricia Moreno swept in, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. Everyone stood until she took her seat. "Be seated. We're here for preliminary hearing in United States versus Mallory, Cortland, and Way. Counsel, are we ready to proceed?" The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp-featured man named David Chen, who was no relation to Sarah, stood up. "Ready, Your Honor." The defense attorneys each stood in turn. 3 different lawyers for 3 different defendants, all expensive, all looking grim. "Your Honor," Mallory's attorney began, "we'd like to move to suppress the audio recording obtained by Miss Elena Reyes on the grounds that it was illegally procured without—" "Motion denied," Judge Moreno interrupted. "Illinois is a one-party consent state. Miss Reyes was present during the conversation. The recording is admissible. Next." Mallory's attorney looked like he'd been slapped. "Your Honor, with respect, we believe Miss Reyes was acting as an agent of Mr. Cole, which would require— She was acting as a private citizen. We've been over this. Motion denied. Move on or sit down." The attorney sat down. Mallory turned to look at Elena for the first time, and the hatred in his eyes was physical. She forced herself to hold his gaze. "You did this to yourself," she thought. "I just recorded it." The prosecution called its first witness, an FBI forensic accountant who walked the court through the maze of offshore accounts, shell companies, and fraudulent transfers that had drained Palmer Industries' pension fund. The numbers were staggering. $18 million moved through 16 different accounts across 7 countries in 6 months. "And where did this money ultimately end up?" David Chen asked. "The bulk of it was split between 3 accounts. One in Grand Cayman, registered to a shell company called Meridian Holdings, one in Singapore under Pacific Ventures LLC, and one in Switzerland under Alpine Capital Group. All 3 shell companies trace back to the defendants. And the pension fund itself? Depleted by 92%. If the scheme had continued for another 3 months, it would have been completely empty." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Elena watched the jury, 12 people who looked like they ranged from a college student to a retired grandmother. Their expressions were disgusted. The defense attorneys cross-examined, trying to poke holes in the forensic accounting, but the FBI agent was unshakable. The money trail was clear, irrefutable. After a lunch recess, they called Elena to the stand. Walking to the witness box felt like wading through quicksand. Every eye in the courtroom was on her. The court reporter waited with her fingers poised over the keys. The judge watched impassively. Elena raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. Her voice didn't shake. Small victory. David Chen approached with a kind smile. "Miss Reyes, can you tell the court what you do for a living?" "I'm a waitress at the Pinnacle Club in Chicago." "And how long have you worked there?" 3 years. "In that time, have you served the defendants Richard Mallory, James Cortland, or Douglas Way?" "Yes, multiple times." "Can you describe the evening of November 14th? Elena took a breath. This was it. The 3 defendants had reserved the Wellington room for a private dinner. I was assigned to serve them. During the meal, they discussed a plan to defraud Palmer Industries, steal from the pension fund, and remove Adrian Cole as CEO. "And what did you do?" "I recorded them." "Why?" Elena looked at the jury, 12 strangers who would help decide if justice was served. Because what they were planning would hurt thousands of people. Employees who'd worked their whole lives, who'd trusted their retirement to Palmer Industries. And because Mr. Cole had asked for my help in finding out who was conspiring against him. Mr. Cole approached you prior to this recording? Yes, about 2 weeks before. He told me he suspected members of his board were plotting something but had no proof. And you agreed to help him? Yes. Did he offer you money in exchange for your cooperation? This was the critical question. Elena met David Chen's eyes. He offered. I refused. Why did you refuse? Because I didn't want it to be about money. I wanted it to be about doing the right thing. David Chen nodded, then introduced the recording as evidence. The courtroom fell silent as Mallory's voice filled the space. The Cole situation is a gift. Adrian's distracted, emotional, vulnerable. Elena watched the jury's faces as the recording played, watched their expressions shift from neutral to disgusted, watched one woman actually flinch when Cortland laughed about pension fraud. When it finished, the silence was deafening. Miss Reyes, is that recording accurate and complete? David Chen asked. Yes. No doctoring, no editing? No, that's exactly what they said. Thank you. No further questions. Then came the cross-examination. Mallory's attorney was a man named Robert Hutchins, probably 60, with gray hair and an expensive suit. He approached Elena with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Miss Reyes, you testified that you refused money from Mr. Cole, but you did accept his offer to help, correct? Yes. And now you're hiding at one of his properties in Lake Geneva? Catherine shot to her feet. Objection? Relevance? Goes to bias, Your Honor. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Miss Reyes. Elena kept her voice steady. I'm staying at Mr. Cole's property because there are reporters camped outside my apartment. It's for my safety. How convenient. And has Mr. Cole offered you anything else? Employment, perhaps? He mentioned a job possibility. I haven't accepted. But the offer's on the table. A position at Palmer Industries, I assume. Quite a step up from waitressing. Objection, Catherine said. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Move on, Mr. Hutchins. But Hutchins was just getting started. Miss Reyes, isn't it true that you specifically requested to serve the Wellington room whenever my client made reservations? Elena had been prepared for this. Yes, because Mr. Cole asked me to listen for anything suspicious related to his board members. Or because you were stalking my client. Objection! Your Honor, I'm entitled to explore alternative explanations for Miss Reyes's behavior. Judge Moreno looked annoyed. Rephrase the question. Miss Reyes, how many times did you serve my client before the November 14th recording? 6 or 7 times. And did you record any of those other dinners? Yes, but nothing incriminating was said. So you recorded my client 7 times without his knowledge or consent. Illinois is a one-party consent state. I was legally allowed to record conversations I was part of. Were you part of those conversations? Or were you eavesdropping while pretending to serve wine? Elena felt her temper flare but forced it down. I was doing my job. They were talking openly. I just happened to be in the room. Happened to be in the room with a recording device hidden under your clothing. Yes. And you don't see anything wrong with that? No, I see something wrong with stealing $18 million from working people's retirement funds. A ripple of approval went through the gallery. Judge Moreno banged her gavel. Order. Hutchins changed tactics. Miss Reyes, have you ever been arrested? No. Ever filed for bankruptcy? No. Ever had a romantic relationship with Adrian Cole? Objection! Catherine was on her feet again. Completely irrelevant and inappropriate. Your Honor, I'm exploring potential bias. There's no bias, Elena snapped before the judge could rule. I barely know Mr. Cole. I helped him because what your clients were doing was wrong. That's it. That's the whole story. Judge Moreno studied her for a moment. I'll allow the question. Answer it, Miss Reyes. No. I've never had a romantic relationship with Adrian Cole. Never even had a conversation with him until he asked for my help. Hutchins tried a few more angles, suggesting Elena had been paid under the table, implying she had a grudge against wealthy people, questioning her motives. But Elena held firm. She'd told the truth. The recording spoke for itself. After 2 hours of cross-examination, Judge Moreno finally called it. We'll recess until tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Elena climbed down from the witness stand on shaky legs. Catherine met her halfway. You did great, she said quietly. Didn't take the bait, stayed factual. That's exactly what we needed. I wanted to punch him. I know, but you didn't. That's what matters. Adrian was waiting in the hallway outside the courtroom. Marcus stood a few feet away, scanning for threats that probably weren't there. You okay? Adrian asked. I've been better. That lawyer made me sound like a crazy stalker. He made himself sound desperate. The jury saw through it. Adrian glanced back toward the courtroom doors. Mallory looks like he's ready to crack. Did you see him when they played the recording? I thought he might actually cry. Good. He should cry. He should feel every bit as scared as the people whose money he stole. There she is, Adrian said with a faint smile. The woman who took down billionaires. They left through the back entrance again, avoiding the media circus out front. The SUV was waiting. Elena collapsed into the seat, exhausted in a way she'd never felt before. How long does this go on? She asked. Weeks. Maybe months, Catherine said from the front seat. This was just the preliminary hearing. Actual trial won't start until spring at the earliest. I can't do this for months. Yes, you can, because the alternative is letting them win. Elena closed her eyes and leaned back. Through the tinted windows, she could see Chicago passing by. Normal people living normal lives. She'd give anything to be one of them again. But there was no going back now. The door had closed the moment she'd pressed record in the Wellington room. Over the next 3 weeks, the preliminary hearings continued. More witnesses testified. Palmer Industries employees whose pensions had been stolen, forensic experts explaining the fraud, FBI agents detailing the investigation. Douglas Way's attorney tried to argue that his client had been coerced by Mallory, that he was the junior partner in the conspiracy. The prosecution destroyed that argument with emails showing Way had actually initiated several of the offshore transfers. Cortland's attorney went with a different strategy, claiming his client had believed everything was legal, that he'd trusted Mallory's assurances. That fell apart when they produced a recording Chen had made where Cortland explicitly acknowledged they were committing crimes. Sarah Chen testified on a Tuesday. Elena watched from the gallery as the woman who'd called her a stupid bitch walked to the stand in an ill-fitting suit, her confidence gone. Chen gave up everyone, not just Mallory and his partners, but 2 other board members who'd known about the scheme and said nothing. She provided emails, text messages, details of meetings where the conspiracy had been planned. Mallory's attorney tried to discredit her on cross, pointing out she was a convicted felon testifying to save herself. But the evidence she'd provided was too solid. The damage was done. By mid-December, Judge Moreno had heard enough. She ruled that all 3 defendants would stand trial on multiple counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and theft. Bail remained denied. Trial date was set for April. Elena was in the gallery when the ruling came down. She watched Mallory's face crumble, watched Cortland put his head in his hands, watched Way just stare blankly ahead like he'd already accepted his fate. Good, she thought. Let them suffer a little longer. That night, Adrian took her to dinner. Not at the Pinnacle Club. Elena would never set foot in that place again, but at a small Italian restaurant in West Loop that didn't take reservations and didn't care who you were. How are you really doing? He asked over wine she barely touched. Honestly, I don't know anymore. Some days I feel like I did the right thing. Other days I wonder if it was worth it. I can't go home, can't work, can't live my life because I'm afraid some reporter or crazy person is going to ambush me. It won't be like this forever. When does it end? Adrian was quiet for a moment. After the trial, probably. Once they're convicted and sentenced, the media will move on to the next story. You'll fade back into obscurity if that's what you want. Is that what you think I want? I don't know. What do you want, Elena? The question caught her off guard. What did she want? 6 months ago, she would have said just to be left alone, to do her job and go home and not be noticed. But now, I want to matter, she heard herself say. I want to do work that means something. I'm tired of being invisible. Then take the job I offered. Come work for Palmer Industries. Help me make sure this never happens again. Elena looked at him across the table. At this man who'd lost his wife and nearly lost his company, but kept fighting anyway. who'd trusted a waitress with everything and never made her feel small for it. "What if I'm not good enough?" she asked quietly. "You're good enough. You proved that already." "I don't have the education, don't have the experience. People will say, I only got the job because..." "Let them say it. Who cares? You'll prove them wrong the same way you proved Mallory wrong, by being better than anyone expects." Elena thought about it, thought about going back to serving wine, thought about fading into the background again, thought about spending the rest of her life wondering what might have been if she'd been brave enough to try. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I'll take it." Adrian smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. "Good. You start January 2nd. Catherine will work out the details." They finished dinner talking about logistics, salary, benefits. The job paid more than Elena had ever imagined making. Enough to get a better apartment, enough to save money, enough to finally feel secure. When Marcus dropped her back at the Lake Geneva house, Elena stood by the windows and looked out at the frozen lake. Snow had fallen while they were at dinner, covering everything in white. It looked peaceful, clean, like the world was starting over. Her phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. "Trial prep starts January. Hope you're ready for round 2. Elena smiled. Ready or not, she was doing this. She thought about Richard Mallory sitting in a cell, waiting for April. Thought about him replaying that dinner in his mind, wondering if he'd looked at her even once, wondering if he'd ever actually seen her. Probably not. Men like Mallory never saw people like her until it was too late. But he saw her now. They all did. And in April, when she took the stand as the prosecution's star witness, when she told 12 jurors exactly what she'd heard and why she'd recorded it, they would see her too. Not as a waitress, not as invisible, but as Elena Reyes, the woman who'd brought down an empire of lies with nothing but patience, courage, and a recording device hidden under her apron. She could live with that. January 2nd arrived cold and gray, the kind of Chicago winter morning that made Elena question every decision that had led her to this moment. She stood outside the Palmer Industries building at 7:45, wearing a new suit Catherine had helped her pick out, staring up at 47 stories of glass and steel and wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. Her phone buzzed. "Adrian. Main lobby. Security knows you're coming. You've got this." Elena took a breath and pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby was already busy with employees arriving for work, clutching coffee cups and briefcases, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who knew exactly where they belonged. Elena didn't feel like she belonged. She felt like an imposter wearing borrowed clothes, about to be exposed. But the security guard smiled when she gave her name and handed her a temporary ID badge. "Mr. Cole's expecting you, 47th floor." The elevator ride felt longer than it should have. Elena watched the numbers climb and tried to remember Catherine's advice from yesterday. You earned this position. Nobody gave it to you as charity. You proved you could see what others missed. The doors opened and Adrian was there, same as he'd been that first night she'd brought him the recording. Except now, he looked better, less exhausted, more present. Grief still lived in his eyes, probably always would, but he wore it differently now. "Welcome to Palmer Industries," he said. Officially this time. He led her past the reception desk to a corner office that made her apartment look like a closet. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. A desk that probably cost more than her car. Bookshelves, filing cabinets, a conference table. "This is mine?" Elena asked. "This is yours. Catherine's team put together an orientation package, employee handbook, company policies, org charts. Your official title is Senior Ethics Compliance Officer. You report directly to me and your job is to be my eyes and ears. If something seems wrong, I want to know about it." "What if I'm wrong? What if I flag something that turns out to be nothing? Then we investigate and move on. Better to check than to miss another Mallory." Adrian pulled out a folder. "I've already got your first assignment. 3 board members who replaced the ones we removed after the conspiracy. I need you to vet them. Background checks, financial records. Look for anything that might indicate they're not who they claim to be." Elena took the folder. Inside were dossiers on 3 people, a tech executive from San Francisco, a finance professor from Northwestern, and a retired Army general. All impressive credentials, all potentially hiding something. "How do I even start?" she asked. "However you think best. That's why I hired you. You see things differently than the rest of us." Adrian checked his watch. "I've got a meeting with the board in 20 minutes. Take the morning to get settled. Catherine set up lunch with HR at noon to finish your paperwork. After that, you're on your own. He left, and Elena stood in her office feeling overwhelmed and terrified and strangely exhilarated all at once. She sat at the desk, her desk, and opened her laptop. Email was already set up. Elena.reyes@palmerindustries.com, a real corporate email address. Her name on company letterhead. She spent the morning reading through the orientation materials, setting up her workspace, trying to look like she knew what she was doing. At noon, she met with HR, a cheerful woman named Denise who walked her through benefits, retirement plans, and employee policies without once mentioning that Elena was the waitress who'd taken down the previous regime. "Any questions?" Denise asked. "Just one. Does everyone know who I am, what I did?" Denise's smile didn't falter. "Some people know. Most don't care. You're not the scandal anymore, Miss Reyes. You're just another employee trying to do good work. My advice? Don't make it bigger than it is." That afternoon, Elena started her first real investigation. She pulled up the background check on the tech executive, Victoria Huang, 43, Stanford MBA, 20 years in Silicon Valley. On paper, she was perfect. But Elena had learned that paper didn't tell the whole story. She started digging. Social media profiles, news articles, SEC filings from companies where Huang had served on boards. Nothing jumped out immediately. Huang seemed legitimate, successful, respected, no obvious red flags. But Elena had learned patience. She kept digging. 2 weeks into the job, she found it. A lawsuit from 3 years ago, settled quietly out of court. A former employee at one of Huang's companies claiming financial irregularities that were never properly investigated. The settlement included an NDA, so details were scarce. But the fact that there'd been a settlement at all raised questions. Elena drafted a memo to Adrian outlining her concerns. She rewrote it 4 times before finally sending it, certain she was making something out of nothing. Adrian responded within an hour. "Good catch. Let's discuss tomorrow morning." The next day, they sat in his office going over the details. Adrian listened carefully, asked pointed questions, didn't dismiss her concerns as paranoia. "I'll have Catherine's team look into it," he said finally. "Probably nothing, but you're right to flag it. This is exactly what I need you doing." "What if it is nothing? What if I'm wasting everyone's time?" "Then we've done our due diligence and moved on. Elena, after what happened with Mallory, I'd rather investigate 100 false alarms than miss one real threat." Over the following weeks, Elena settled into a rhythm. She attended board meetings, sitting quietly in the corner and watching dynamics, listening for inconsistencies. She reviewed financial reports, flagged unusual transactions, asked questions that made people uncomfortable. Some employees resented her, this waitress playing corporate investigator. Others appreciated having someone who actually cared about ethics. The Victoria Huang situation turned out to be nothing. The lawsuit had been frivolous, settled because fighting it would have been more expensive than paying out. But Adrian was right. Better to check. January became February. The trial date loomed closer. Catherine kept Elena updated on developments. Plea deal negotiations that went nowhere. Defense motions that were denied. Prosecution witnesses being prepped. Mallory, Cortland, and Wei remained in federal custody, their legal options dwindling. Elena tried not to think about it. Tried to focus on her work, her new life. But at night, alone in the apartment she'd finally been able to rent in Lincoln Park, 2 bedrooms, actual closet space, a view that wasn't a brick wall, she'd lie awake wondering what the trial would be like. Wondering if she'd hold up under cross-examination. Wondering if justice would actually be served. In early March, 3 months before the trial was set to begin, Elena got called to an emergency meeting in Adrian's office. Catherine was already there, along with David Chen from the U.S. Attorney's Office. "Douglas Wei wants to flip," David said without preamble. "Full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence." Elena's stomach dropped. Another deal? Different from Chen's situation. Wei's offering testimony against Mallory specifically. Claims Mallory was the architect of everything, that he and Cortland were essentially following orders. "Is that true?" Adrian asked. "Partially. Mallory was definitely the ringleader. But Wei and Cortland were willing participants, not innocent dupes. Still, Wei's testimony could strengthen our case significantly. He's got details we don't have, conversations, meetings, decisions that only the 3 of them were part of. What kind of reduced sentence? Elena asked quietly. 8 years instead of 25. He'd serve his time at a minimum security facility, eligible for parole in 5. That's not justice. David looked at her with something like sympathy. No, it's not. But it's reality? We can convict Mallory and Cortland without Way's testimony, but with it, we guarantee they'll spend the rest of their lives in prison. Sometimes you have to make deals with small fish to catch the big ones. Elena looked at Adrian. He was staring out the window, jaw clenched. What do you think? She asked him. I think I hate it, but I also think Way's an opportunist and a coward. And if he's willing to sell out Mallory to save himself, we should use that. Adrian turned to David. What does he want in return besides reduced time? Protection. He's terrified of Mallory, thinks there might be retaliation. Mallory's in federal custody. For now, We's thinking long term. If Mallory somehow gets out or has connections on the outside, Adrian laughed bitterly. Tell Way he can rot in fear for all I care. But if his testimony puts Mallory away for life, I won't fight the deal. The agreement was finalized within a week. Douglas Way would testify for the prosecution. In exchange, his sentence would be capped at 8 years. Mallory's attorney tried to block it, claiming witness tampering and coercion. Judge Moreno wasn't having it. With Way's cooperation, the prosecution's case became ironclad. They had the recording. They had the financial evidence. They had Sarah Chen's testimony. And now they had one of the actual conspirators laying out the entire scheme in excruciating detail. The trial started on April 15th, a Tuesday that dawned sunny and warm. Elena wore the same suit from her first day at Palmer Industries. It felt like armor now, something that announced she belonged in these rooms even when she felt like she didn't. The courtroom was packed. National media had descended on Chicago for what they were calling the trial of the decade. White-collar crime on a massive scale. Pension theft, corporate conspiracy. And at the center of it all, a former waitress who'd brought the whole thing crashing down. Elena sat in the gallery next to Catherine and watched jury selection. 12 people and 4 alternates, chosen carefully by both sides. The prosecution wanted people who understood what it meant to work for a living. The defense wanted people who might be skeptical of a conspiracy theory built on a recording. In the end, they got a mix. 2 retired teachers, a mechanic, a grocery store manager, a nurse, a software engineer, an electrician, a college student, a small business owner, a librarian, a postal worker, an accountant. People who looked like they might actually care that 15,000 employees almost lost their retirement savings. Opening statements began on day 3. David Chen laid out the prosecution's case methodically. He showed the jury the numbers. $18 million stolen, laundered through offshore accounts, destined for the defendant's pockets. He played portions of the recording. He explained how Adrian Cole had suspected corruption and enlisted Elena's help. You're going to hear from Miss Reyes directly, David told the jury. She's going to tell you about serving wine to 3 men who thought they were invisible, who thought nobody was paying attention, who made the mistake of speaking freely because they assumed the waitress didn't matter. Mallory's attorney, Robert Hutchins, countered with a story about overzealous prosecution and circumstantial evidence. He painted Adrian as paranoid and vindictive, Elena as a stooge who'd recorded private conversations illegally. This case is built on the word of a woman who stalked my client for weeks, Hutchins said. A woman who was compensated handsomely for her cooperation, who now works for the very man she supposedly helped out of pure altruism. Ask yourselves, what's her real motivation here? Elena forced herself not to react, forced herself to remember Catherine's coaching. Let the evidence speak. Don't get emotional. The truth will win. The prosecution spent the next 2 weeks building their case. FBI agents testified about the financial investigation. Forensic accountants explained the money trail. Palmer Industries employees testified about discovering their pension fund had been gutted. One woman, a 62-year-old who'd worked in logistics for 30 years, broke down crying on the stand. I was going to retire next year, she said through tears. My husband's sick. We need that money. And they just stole it like it didn't matter, like we didn't matter. The defense tried to poke holes, suggesting the company's financial problems were more complicated than simple theft. But the numbers didn't lie. $18 million had disappeared, and it had ended up in accounts controlled by Mallory, Cortland, and Way. On day 12, Sarah Chen testified. She walked the jury through her role in the conspiracy, how Mallory had recruited her, what she'd been promised. She provided emails, text messages, recordings of conversations where the plan had been discussed. The defense tore into her credibility, a convicted felon testifying to save herself. But the documentary evidence was damning. On day 15, Douglas Way took the stand. He looked smaller than Elena remembered. Prison had worn him down. The nervous energy was gone, replaced by something that looked like resignation. "Mr. Way, can you describe your relationship with Richard Mallory?" David Chen asked. "Richard was my mentor. I'd known him for 15 years. When he approached me about the Palmer Industries opportunity, I trusted him." "What did he tell you?" "That Adrian Cole was weak, vulnerable, that the company was ripe for the taking, that if we played it right, we could force a buyout or a liquidation and walk away with hundreds of millions." "And you agreed to participate?" Way looked down at his hands. "Yes. I knew it was wrong. I knew people would get hurt, but Richard made it sound inevitable. Like Adrian was going to lose the company anyway, so we might as well profit from it." "Whose idea was it to drain the pension fund?" "Richard's. He said it would create a crisis that would force the board's hand, that we'd restore the money later, once we had control." "Did you believe that?" "No, I knew we were stealing it. I knew those people would never see that money again." The courtroom was silent. Way looked up at the jury, and Elena saw something in his face she hadn't expected. Shame. "Why did you do it?" David asked quietly. "Greed. That's all. Just greed." The defense cross-examined, trying to paint Way as a liar, desperate to reduce his sentence. But Way stuck to his story. He'd participated in a criminal conspiracy. He'd stolen from people who couldn't afford to lose. He deserved to go to prison. "At least he owned it," Catherine murmured to Elena during a recess. "More than Mallory will ever do." On day 18, they called Elena to the stand. Walking to the witness box felt different this time. The preliminary hearing had been practice. This was real. This was the moment that would determine if justice was served. She raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. David Chen's questioning was thorough but gentle. He walked her through her background, her job at the Pinnacle Club, her first meeting with Adrian. Then they got to the recording. "Miss Reyes, why did you agree to help Mr. Cole?" Elena looked at the jury. "Because what they were planning would hurt people who couldn't defend themselves. People who work hard and play by the rules and trust that the system will protect them. Someone needed to stop it." "Did you receive any compensation for your cooperation?" "No, Mr. Cole offered, but I refused." "Why?" "Because I didn't want it to be about money. I wanted it to be about doing what was right." They played the recording again. 37 minutes of Richard Mallory and James Cortland and Douglas Way planning the destruction of Palmer Industries and the theft of $18 million. When it finished, Elena watched the jury's faces. Several of them looked angry. "Miss Reyes, did you doctor or edit this recording in any way?" "No, that's exactly what they said, word for word." "Thank you. No further questions." Then came Robert Hutchins. He approached like a shark smelling blood. "Miss Reyes, you testified you received no compensation, but you did receive a job, didn't you?" "I was offered a job after the investigation concluded." "Yes, a high-paying job, quite a step up from waitressing." "I earned that job by doing work that needed to be done." "Or you were rewarded for serving your employer's agenda." "Objection," David said. "Argumentative." "Sustained. Ask a question, Mr. Hutchins." "Miss Reyes, isn't it true that you specifically targeted my client? That you requested to serve him multiple times?" "I was asked to observe board members who might be involved in suspicious activity. Mr. Mallory was one of them." "So you stalked him?" "I served him wine. He never noticed me. That's not stalking, that's being invisible." Several jurors smiled at that. Hutchins didn't like it. "You recorded 7 private conversations without anyone's knowledge. Illinois is a one-party consent state. I was legally allowed to record conversations I was present for. But morally? Ethically? Don't you think there's something troubling about secretly recording people?" Elena had thought about this question for months, had wrestled with it in the middle of sleepless nights. Now, under oath, in front of 12 strangers who would decide if justice was served, she gave the only answer she had. What's troubling is three men in expensive suits casually discussing how to steal $18 million from people who'd worked their entire lives for it. What's troubling is that they felt comfortable enough to laugh about it over wine. What's troubling is that they thought they'd get away with it because nobody was watching. I recorded them because someone needed to be watching. Because the people they were stealing from deserved to have someone pay attention. The gallery erupted in applause. Judge Moreno banged her gavel. "Order! There will be order in this courtroom." But the damage was done. Elena had connected with the jury. Hutchins tried a few more questions, but his heart wasn't in it. He knew he'd lost. The trial lasted 4 more weeks. James Cortland took the stand and tried to claim he'd been manipulated by Mallory, that he hadn't understood they were committing crimes. The prosecution destroyed that defense with emails where Cortland had explicitly discussed stealing pension funds. Mallory never testified. His attorneys advised against it. Instead, they put on a parade of character witnesses who testified that Richard Mallory was a respected businessman, a philanthropist, a pillar of the community. The prosecution countered with evidence that Mallory had been involved in questionable business deals going back 20 years. Closing arguments began on May 20th. David Chen gave a methodical summary of the evidence, the recording, the financial trail, the testimony of Wei and Chen, the devastation caused to Palmer Industries employees. "The defense wants you to believe this is complicated," David told the jury, "that there are shades of gray, that maybe these men made mistakes but didn't intend to hurt anyone. But I'm here to tell you, it's simple. 3 men stole $18 million. They planned it carefully. They executed it methodically. They would have gotten away with it if Elena Reyes hadn't had the courage to record them and Adrian Cole hadn't had the courage to fight back. Your job is to hold them accountable." Hutchins gave his closing the next day. He tried to create reasonable doubt, suggesting the evidence was circumstantial, that the recording was taken out of context, that Palmer Industries' financial problems were more complex than simple theft. The jury didn't buy it. They deliberated for 6 hours over 2 days. Elena spent that time in a conference room with Catherine and Adrian, drinking bad coffee and checking her phone compulsively for updates. When the call finally came that the jury had reached a verdict, Elena's hand started shaking and didn't stop. They assembled in the courtroom. Mallory, Cortland, and Wei were brought in by marshals. Mallory looked defiant. Cortland looked terrified. Wei just looked tired. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Moreno asked. The 4 women stood. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of securities fraud, how do you find the defendant, Richard Mallory?" "Guilty." "On the charge of wire fraud?" "Guilty." "On the charge of theft of pension funds?" "Guilty." It went on. Guilty on all counts. All 3 defendants, 37 separate charges, 37 guilty verdicts. Mallory's face went gray. Cortland put his head in his hands. Wei didn't react at all. The courtroom erupted. Judge Moreno banged her gavel, calling for order. Adrian reached over and squeezed Elena's hand. Catherine was smiling. In the gallery, Palmer Industries employees were crying, hugging each other, celebrating justice finally served. Sentencing was set for July. Until then, all 3 defendants would remain in custody. As the marshals led them out, Mallory turned and looked directly at Elena. The hatred in his eyes was pure and undiluted. He mouthed something she couldn't quite make out. Probably a threat. Probably a curse. Elena stared back and didn't look away. She'd stopped being afraid of Richard Mallory the moment she'd pressed record in the Wellington room. Outside the courthouse, media was waiting. Cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions. Catherine had prepared a statement, but when they asked Elena directly how she felt, she answered honestly. "I'm glad it's over. I'm glad they were held accountable. And I hope everyone watching understands that people who seem invisible are often paying more attention than you think." The clip went viral within hours. By evening, Elena's face was on every major news outlet. The waitress who took down billionaires. The hero of corporate America. The woman who proved that doing the right thing still mattered. But Elena didn't feel like a hero. She just felt tired. Sentencing came in July on a day so hot the air conditioning in the federal courthouse could barely keep up. Elena sat in the gallery and watched Richard Mallory stand before Judge Moreno. "Mr. Mallory, you have been convicted of 37 counts of fraud, theft, and conspiracy. You betrayed the trust of 15,000 employees. You stole their retirement savings. You showed no remorse throughout this trial. Judge Moreno looked at him with something close to contempt. I hereby sentence you to 45 years in federal prison, to be served consecutively. No possibility of parole. Mallory swayed like he might fall. 45 years. He was 63. He'd die in prison. James Cortland got 35 years. Douglas Way, because of his cooperation, got 8. All 3 were remanded to federal custody immediately. As the marshals led them out for the last time, Elena felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a quiet sense that balance had been restored, that the scales had tipped back toward justice. She walked out of this courthouse into bright summer sunshine. Adrian was waiting on the steps. "It's done," he said. "Yeah, it's done." They stood there for a moment, watching the city move around them. Normal life continuing, oblivious to the fact that 3 men who'd thought they were untouchable had just been sentenced to spend the rest of their lives in prison. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now we rebuild. The pension fund's been restored, insurance and asset recovery. Every employee who lost money is being made whole. The company's stable, stock price is recovering. We move forward." "And me?" Adrian looked at her. "You keep doing what you've been doing, being the person who pays attention, the one who notices things others miss, the one who has the courage to speak up when something's wrong." Elena nodded slowly. 6 months ago, she'd been a waitress nobody noticed. Now she was senior ethics compliance officer at a billion-dollar company. Star witness in a federal trial. The face of corporate whistleblowing. She still didn't quite believe it was real. But as she walked down the courthouse steps toward the car where Marcus was waiting, Elena realized something important. She'd spent her entire life trying to be invisible because visibility felt dangerous. Being seen meant being vulnerable. Being noticed meant taking risks. But invisibility had its own cost. It meant never mattering, never making a difference, never using whatever power you had to change things. Richard Mallory had made the mistake of thinking invisibility meant powerlessness, that the quiet woman serving wine couldn't hurt him, that people like Elena didn't matter in rooms where deals got made and empires rose and fell. He'd learned differently. They all had. A month later, Elena was in her office reviewing financial reports when Adrian knocked on her door. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always." He came in carrying a folder. "The board met this morning. We voted unanimously to establish the Sarah Cole Memorial Ethics Foundation, named after my wife. It'll provide funding for whistleblower protection, ethics training, and support for people who speak up against corporate corruption." Elena's throat tightened. "That's beautiful. I want you to run it, in addition to your current position. The foundation will be independent, funded by Palmer Industries, but operating autonomously. You'd have full authority to investigate complaints, support whistleblowers, and hold corporations accountable." "Adrian, I don't know if I'm qualified. You're the most qualified person I know. You lived it. You understand what it takes to stand up to powerful people. Who better to help others do the same?" Elena looked out at her office windows at the city spread below. Somewhere out there were people like her 6 months ago. People working jobs where they were invisible. People seeing things they shouldn't, knowing things were wrong, too scared to speak up. Maybe she could help them. Maybe that's what all of this had been for. Not just to take down Mallory, but to prove that ordinary people could stand up to extraordinary power and win. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." Adrian smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Sarah would have liked you, by the way. She always said the most important people are the ones nobody's watching." After he left, Elena sat in silence for a while. She thought about her mother, who'd worked herself to death being invisible. About all the people she'd served at the Pinnacle Club, who'd never learned her name. About Richard Mallory sitting in a federal prison, probably still wondering how a waitress had destroyed him. She thought about the moment she'd agreed to help Adrian, the fear she'd felt, the certainty that she was making a mistake. But it hadn't been a mistake. It had been the first time in her life she'd chosen to be visible, to use her voice, to matter. Her phone buzzed, a text from Catherine. "Bloomberg wants an interview about the foundation. Interested?" Elena stared at the message. 6 months ago, she would have said no immediately. Would have hidden, stayed small, protected herself from attention. But she wasn't that person anymore. "Yes. Let's do it." Because the truth was, being invisible had never actually protected her. It had just made her easy to ignore. And the world had too many people being ignored already. Too many voices going unheard. Too many injustices happening because nobody was watching. Elena Reyes had spent 30 years being nobody, being the woman people looked through instead of at, being background noise in rooms where important decisions got made. Never again. She'd learned that the most dangerous weapon against corruption wasn't money or power or connections. It was attention. It was someone paying attention when they weren't supposed to. Someone listening when everyone assumed nobody was listening. Someone caring enough to take the risk. That's what had taken down Richard Mallory. Not the FBI or the prosecutors or Adrian's lawyers. Just a quiet woman with a recording device and the courage to press record. Just someone who decided that being invisible wasn't the same as being powerless. Just someone who finally chose to be seen. And in choosing to be seen, Elena Reyes had changed everything.